Hello and welcome to the webinar, How Modular Automation is Shaping the Future of Manufacturing. I'm Jennifer Sewell, Marketing Director at Vention, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we dive into it, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping rules. So we have muted everyone, but we do want to hear from you. So please feel free to submit your questions at the dialog box at the bottom. We have about 250 registrants today, so time permitted, we'll try to get to all of your questions. If you have very specific questions, please, the best is to just email us directly or use the chat function and we can follow up after the webinar. We are recording this webinar, so we'll send a recording to all registrants a couple days after we conclude. And with me today, without further ado, I've got Simon Drexler, who's the Director of LMT Products at ATS Automation, and Patrick Eld, who's the Chief Business Development Officer at Vention. I will let them introduce themselves and the two companies in a couple minutes. Just want to cover a couple of the key points that we'll be discussing today. So the first is the implications of modularity in manufacturing. The second is how to scale with modular automation. The third is, given everything that's going on, how manufacturers are rethinking supply chains. And finally, we'll conclude with the impasse of hardware and software and how modularity is impacting that. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Simon, who will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Simon Drexler. I'm the Director of Linear Motion Technologies at ATS Automation. And for those who don't know, ATS is one of the largest custom automation suppliers in the world. We have about 4,500 employees in about 24 manufacturing facilities and a number of engineering offices throughout the globe. You know, as part of that, I get to work with a number of partners and see a number of facilities, and that gives a lot of insight into what's happening in the automation world and some of the trends that we're seeing. And modularization really touches on a number of those. And so if we're looking at SuperTrack specifically in the role that I play at ATS, SuperTrack leads the product arm within the business. And SuperTrack itself is really a smart conveyance system that served as the foundation of a lot of the automation that ATS has built for the last approximately 20 years. It was a product that was invented by ATS in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada, and really served as the driver for how ATS built automation for a number of years. The product itself is an extensive feature set, but most importantly, it offers individual shuttle control, and that enables a lot of advantages in machine design and automation. And that includes being a key enabler to the modular approach that we're going to talk about today. So I'm looking forward to answering some questions and sharing some thoughts with you.
Right. Thanks, Simon. I think I'll introduce myself. So I'm Patrick Halde. I'm responsible for business development at Vention. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Vention, we're a manufacturing automation platform that's based out of Montreal, Canada. And we enable manufacturers to expand the range of processes that can be automated profitably. So I'll take 2 minutes to explain a little bit more about Vention. Our users typically start with our design tool that we call Machine Builder, which is a simplified CAD environment that's accessible on your web browser and that's loaded with hundreds of components for automation that are modular. Our design software understands how these components can connect together to create different types of automated equipment, which makes the process faster and easier. We can see on the slide here some examples of automated equipment that can be created with Vention. There's also a library of over 1,000 public designs that are example machines of what can be built with Vention, and that allows our users to also get to a design even faster. People can also program and simulate their machine directly in their web browser in a code-free environment that it can be deployed directly on the machine once it is purchased. After that, procurement is done online and delivery can be as fast as next day. And then once received, users can assemble their equipment just like you would with an IKEA furniture or use one of our partners in the commissioning process. So in short, we allow creation of custom equipment for discrete manufacturing processes, just like the one we see here.
Great, thanks to both of you, great introductions. So I'm going to dive into the questions. And You know, manufacturing has historically been a slow-moving industry, very traditional. But I think COVID-19 has kind of created new challenges that are requiring manufacturers really to increase the speed of execution at a pace that they've never experienced before. So my first question for the two of you is, what is it about modularity that is helping manufacturers move faster?
Mm-hmm. Right. The topic of today's webinar is really about modular automation. And I think we should start with defining what is modularity. And we've put examples here of modular homes, furniture, and shipping equipment. And in just a few words, modularity can be defined with three different things. First is the separation, the functional separation of a whole system into its discrete parts. These parts or modules can be scalable and reusable. And the interfaces between these modules need to be predefined. And that is the one common thing that is true between modular homes, furniture, and modular automation. Now, if we think about modularity, it really is a trade-off for which the main benefits are an increased speed, right? There's faster speed from idea to design, as one can start from the existing building blocks to form a whole system rather than starting from a blank sheet of paper. It's also a faster time to market, as modules can be pre-made, in stock, and available for quick delivery. We also see an overall cost reduction that comes from avoiding the reengineering of problems that have been solved before. And finally, the scalable, flexible designs that one can add, remove, or substitute modules as their needs evolve. So this comes as a trade-off in terms of form factor, interface, and sometimes function, depending on how granular the whole system is decomposed in modules. But what we see, just to circle back to the initial question, is that the overall increase in speed that comes from using modular blocks for automation, just like Vention and ATS offers, vastly outweighs the inherent limitations that come from modularity. And so for me, right, every time there's a new component that is modular, it unlocks an exponential set of use cases that can be deployed just as quickly and easily as before.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And we've seen a lot of examples of that in recent times with ramping up test manufacturing or anything to do with the current situation that we're in globally, where you're trying to ramp up very quickly. So speed is key. And if you have truly structured your design where you can leverage proven modules, you can focus your design effort on the thing that's unproven. And also by having modules, if you know what that system and that piece is capable of doing, you're able to replicate that throughout the system design. And that allows the designers to move faster, it allows your supply chain to move faster, and ultimately leads to an integrated automation solution on the floor quicker.
Yep.
Very interesting. Now, you both are kind of citing very innovative technologies, and in the last 30 years, there have been very few changes to the way that we deliver industrial automation to factories. So how can manufacturers navigate between relying on proven technologies that they've used in the last 30 years and adopting solutions that accelerate growth and implementation?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. And I do believe, and I'll make the case, that manufacturers now more than ever have an imperative to innovate. And we've highlighted several trends there. On the top, the longer term, broader trends. And at the bottom there, some of the new normal, quote unquote, trends that arise from the COVID-19 situation. So in just a few words, there's been an increased pressure on shorter product life cycles. And that pressure is applied across all industries. It means there's less time for a product to generate revenues, which in turn means that manufacturers must find innovative solutions to get a more interesting payback period in their factory investments, therefore a quicker deployment time or quicker deployment of their equipment. There's also an acceleration of factory automation. Most manufacturers of plant equipment are moving towards a simplification of products, which is something that we're highlighting here today, which in turn is opening the door for automation in new segments of manufacturing. And the modularization of products fits really well into this trend. And thirdly, there's there's the ease of use that is paramount. Arguably, the factory automation technology is where the personal computing industry was in the late 80s or beginning of the 90s. The consumerization and modularization is opening up the possibilities for a large number of non-experts to be empowered to create and run automated machines, particularly through some code-free programming. And I think this is what the new generation will come to expect of their workplace. And after that, we can talk about the new normal trends, right? Robots don't catch viruses, or at least not the coronavirus type. And in recent history, most manufacturers have optimized for efficiency of their production rather than resilience, which will probably change in the future. There's plenty of recent literature that highlight how there will be long-lasting effects from social distancing, one of which will most likely create a strong tailwind for factory automation. And after that, if you're like me, right, working from home has changed our habits. It's redefining the baseline of what employees will expect in terms of interactions with suppliers, customers, colleagues, and other stakeholders. And in other words, innovative cloud-based solutions for collaborating at a distance and contactless B2B e-commerce experiences are likely to become more of the norm. And finally, I think just this webinar with the strong attendance that we see today is perhaps a great example of how manufacturers are more open than ever before to new solutions and finding ways to deal with a new normal. And so I think all these trends point to manufacturers having to innovate now more than ever before, and they will look for new solutions that will build on scalable technologies like Vention and the SuperTrack.
And this is an area where I think SuperTrack really excels as a platform for helping and enabling manufacturers to think a little bit differently and take a different approach. And if you look at the slide here, you could walk into most facilities around the world and you can look at something that's similar to this. You have a piece of automation or a piece of semi-automation, and you have people who are moving product or enabling process in between them. This is a very traditional approach to manufacturing. But where SuperTrack is like a proven flexible foundation, and the individual control that you have of shuttles really enables connection of those modules. And connection is something that's extremely important, because now you no longer have a series of disparate processes. You have a system at which you work with. And why SuperTrack is so good at doing this is because with that individual shuttle control, and there's a host of feature set that makes it capable and smooth for doing this, but it's really the individual shuttle control that enables it, because the processes don't have to be exactly balanced in takt time. So right down to the millisecond, you can stop product where it needs to stop, when it needs to stop. And right in line, you can create a buffer situation to queue product going into each one of those processes. And then more than that, because you have a configurable conveyance foundation, it really enables this modular automation approach, so that if you're creating a system out of the modules that you have, if for whatever reason, once you've now hit the ground running, you've hit the shop floor, and process 3 takes twice as long as you expected it to in design, well, that's okay. You can double it up. Or maybe once you're actually assembling the product or executing on the process that you want, and process 6 should have gone before process 4. Well, that's okay too. You can switch it around, and right in the configuration interface, you can make those changes to the system that you have now built by connecting a series of independent modules.
Very interesting. And I think this kind of hones in on a topic that's been discussed at great lengths, in that as manufacturers begin to reopen their factories, or maybe they need to retool their factories, there's no denying that COVID has had a human toll, but it's also exacerbated longstanding manufacturing challenges. So as the manufacturers begin to reopen their plants, how can they, ramp up production and their plants, what will their recovery process look like? And what's the impact of modular automation and technologies like this on that recovery process?
And I would You know, honestly, I'd love to be able to detail out exactly what the plan to return to work for looks. Oh, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
No, I think you're right, Simon. We're tackling a big question right now, and I don't think no one knows what the recovery process will look like, right? But I do believe it's pointing towards modular automation, like Vention is able to provide. And so while we can't predict the future, I think we try to identify a number of impacts that we can all agree will affect the shop floors everywhere. And there's new standards from social distancing and PPE requirements and working from home. And there's going to be progressive reopening, meaning minimal CapEx available in the short term, and imperatives for speed to adapt the production. Now, this suggests that there's going to be an increased cost of having people physically on the shop floor, right? So social distancing will need barriers, just like the picture that we can see here that we've created in the last couple of weeks. And will also mean that there's going to be more shop floor space that's needed, and it's already at a premium. More cost for PPE and for the health and safety of workers, non-overlapping shifts, etc. And at the same time, this is combined with less financial resources available to invest on ramping up the production, as budgets are likely frozen or reduced for an unknown amount of time. And so I believe modular automation, like Vention is able to provide, will allow manufacturers to pivot in light of these constraints and limit the number of people coming back on the shop floor, while at the same time automating repetitive operations with limited investment. All that in a timeline and at a cost that is a fraction of what traditional automation can offer. So while I don't know what the recovery process will look like, I do believe that we can play a significant role in the reopening of plants.
Yeah, and building on that, I think the biggest thing for all of us is the world's changed and we need to think differently. And I look at the situation that we're currently in, and it's been an accelerator to a lot of the trends that we were already seeing. And I think, you know, a lot of the people who are on the call have probably seen the same thing, and that's why you're here and we're talking and having this discussion, is we need to think differently. And there's absolutely going to be a greater focus on resource utilization for a number of reasons. You know, Pat, you just mentioned, I think for a while we're going to be a little bit more stringent about where we're spending our CapEx, and we need to make certain that there's a business case behind it and probably some risk mitigation there, because some things are going to be a little bit more uncertain. Because we are likely to reshore or shift some manufacturing around the world, we're going to be careful about the people resources and particularly floor space utilization here in North America. And this is another area where a modular approach to automation, enabled by a system like SuperTrack or a platform like SuperTrack, it helps us be more efficient with both our CapEx and our floor space. And, you know, automation in general helps us be efficient with our people. And, you know, very quickly, the case that you're looking at here is a story that we see over and over again. You have a system on the left, it's designed with traditional technologies, you know, standard conveyance and other approaches. There's nothing wrong with it, it works very well, but it takes up about 80 square meters on the floor. And what happened with this customer is they produced a product, they had that line on the left that you see, and they saw significant demand in the marketplace, more so than they expected. And they came to ATS and they said, guys, we need some more automation, but we don't have space for 4 more lines at 80 meters. What can you do for us? And so at that time, we looked at retooling it. We looked at our options. We proposed back a half SuperTrack integration line. They said, yeah, that's great. We'd like it to be smaller. And so then we came back with the system on the right after taking a look at it even further, really implementing a modular approach. And in the end, from original system to one that was on a SuperTrack foundation, saved 44% floor space. Overall, the system cost less because it was significantly simpler. And to be honest, the system worked more effectively as well. So you got a 5% OEE increase. And so this is an absolute home run example of where you can apply a modular automation approach. You know, you're not always going to see all of these advanced, or, you know, to the extent you have here, 44% cost reduction and an OEE increase, but you almost always see at least a subset of them.
that's really interesting. And I think one of the main points that you're driving home here is that, yes, we're experiencing unprecedented disruptions to our supply chain, but we're also seeing a lot of nimble manufacturers who are reconfiguring their existing operations to produce much needed products. And they're also changing the way that they hire in order to accommodate these changes. So I think it begs maybe a wider question in that as companies start to rethink their supply chains at a much longer term view, what impact does modular automation play in those rethought supply chains?
I think what it does is it helps you manage your risk in a really uncertain environment. And business conditions in general are fairly uncertain. You've got different product features and market features, and you don't know how people are exactly going to respond to what it is that you're trying to do as a business. So there's always that uncertainty, but the current situation has kind of added a layer on top of that. And so we'll be a little more conscious about managing risk moving forward. And so personally, I really like the idea of adding automation as it's needed. And the story that you see on the screen is probably my favorite SuperTrack case study. And I think it really hammers home why the ATS and Vention partnership is one that can be quite valuable to those that are on the call. You can take a SuperTrack foundation, and right from the very beginning, if you have expectations of high volume, high complexity automation, you can start developing those processes right from the very beginning. And so the customer here, this was an FDA certified device. They started development on a couple of sections of SuperTrack. And then as they moved through the steps of FDA certification, they did a semi-autonomous solution. So 6 parts per minute, not particularly high speed. But what they did was they added automation where automation made sense. Inspection, part loading, things that are relatively straightforward and didn't require a lot of custom development. But then when the FDA certification went through and they went into the marketplace and started to gauge exactly what the response would be to the new device, they invested in a low volume cell. So they took the people out, they added automation as it was needed, so that they had the reliability and all the benefits of automation, already kind of an extension of the system that they'd already built and validated through an FDA certified process. And then, fortunate for this customer, they started selling this device in the market. It went very well. And then they invested in their stage 4 automation, and they moved from 35 parts per minute to 140 parts per minute, just high speed, fairly complex production line. And so taking this modular approach is really a good way of being able to manage risk right from development at the very beginning, because you're starting to develop the manufacturing and automation processes all the way up through that high volume requirement when you have the need in the marketplace to support the investment in the custom and more difficult pieces of the automation world.
I think you're right, Simon. And you've talked about managing risks, and I think this really well highlights the partnership between Vention and ATS. Right? There's a new reality that needs to be adapted to according to specific requirements in terms of products, region, existing supply chain, each of which is specific to a given manufacturer. And so if I focus on the top part of this chart, Vention allows the manufacturers to make low cost, low risk, quickly deployed changes to their manufacturing process. And that takes them one step forward towards their future supply chain. And whatever the right answer may be for them, and sort of as they discover what that right answer is. So we've seen manufacturers of all sizes start small and automate high value, discrete part of their manufacturing process, and with a view of what's to come next as they increase their automation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Patrick, you summarized that really well.
I think one underlying theme here, naturally the webinar is about modularity, but one interesting theme here is that we're seeing a convergence of modularity at the hardware level, modularity at the software level, and where they traditionally operate in silos, now we're starting to see them operate together. So one of the final questions is that what impact would this convergence of modularity at the hardware and software level have on our ability to deliver and scale complex automation projects? And I think it's something that we've begun to touch upon earlier on the webinar. So that's my final question for you.
I think this is one of my favorite trends in the automation industry as a whole, to be honest, is you're no longer seeing an electrical engineer look at the electronics piece and sort of focus on their piece of the pie and that's it. There's a realization across the industry that automation is a mechatronic solution. Hardware and software have to tie together to be able to provide the customer base the experience they expect. And that's why we've seen a democratization of some of the automation technologies. And they're really following suit from our expectations from the personal world. I think we often overlook how much of an impact smartphones have had on our lives and how easy they have made things that used to be quite complicated. And we inherently now bring that expectation with us into the working world. And so we've seen interfaces improve, technology improve, and the accessibility of automation technology, it changed significantly in the last 5 to 10 years. Collaborative robots have been a significant driver of that, but by no means the only or best example, to be totally honest. And why that's really exciting to me is that the automation pie is growing. You know, with that democratization of the technology, we're able to find business cases and returns to automate things that we wouldn't have been able to before. And that does nothing but help improve utilization on the production floor and make our companies more efficient. So the whole trend is really exciting. Yeah, and like in that, there's still obviously a place for automation experts as well. You know, traditionalists, you know, sometimes you can get into a conversation where, you know, the high speed, high complexity automation still requires automation experts, and it will for a very long time. But what the democratization is doing is opening up use cases at the other end of the value stream. And that's what's really important to the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I'll fully agree with that, Simon. And I'll emphasize the point on democratization. You know, we discussed today the convergence of both of our products that come at it from a really different angle or different starting point. And I think with Vention and SuperTrack working together, we can now kickstart the early stages of an automation journey with a fast ROI on initial steps, an easy implementation, and a clear view on how to scale towards more high-speed, more complex automation. And I'm excited for us to see and be part of this new wave of automation technologies. And I do believe that today, and the image we're looking at is a great example, we're unlocking a whole new world of potential improvements in the manufacturing industry. The automation projects that seem difficult or financially out of reach can now be tackled in lower risk, lower cost, quick deployment, fast ROI manner. And that to me is extremely exciting.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
I think we'll open up for a couple of questions. We've got quite a few good ones coming in here. And the first one builds off of your previous statement, Pat. We talk a lot about speed to implementation. So what's the lead time for a solution like this? I'm assuming of a complete solution with plug into a SuperTrack.
Maybe I'll start with Vention. I think in terms of the different modules that we can put together, it can be as fast as next day, right? And that counts for structural modules, and we're also able to deliver simple automated equipment in a matter of a couple of days. We have customers that go from an idea to having a working solution on their shop floor in as fast as 3 days with Vention equipment only.
Yeah, and the SuperTrack portion of that, a little longer on the lead time. So normally our standard lead time is about 8 weeks, depends on our inventory levels at any given time. But what we do in that time frame is we generally work with our partners to validate the system design, kind of leverage the catalog of experience that we have within our team to make sure that the product's being applied correctly. And we act as a bit of a consultant through the process and try to really help and enable that you're getting the best experience that you can out of the product and services that we offer.
And so you talk about consultants. what type of expertise do you need to implement a solution like that? That's a good question.
Yeah. One of the best things about SuperTrack is that it has an interface called TrackMaster that's been honed, literally over 20 years of deployment in some of the most complicated automation deployments in the world. And it's used across our organization inside of ATS and, across a number of other areas. And what we've created is a configurator. And that takes all the complexity out of the actual integration of this type of system where, a SuperTrack can arrive at your facility, fully assembled, ready to go. It's a little bit more than this, but you plug it into the wall, you turn it on, you get the configurator going, and you can have motion inside of a morning. So, we've taken to that democratization trend, and SuperTrack is really a part of that.
And for Vention equipment, if I think about a discrete, say, Cartesian robot or pick and place application, there's no special expertise that's required, right? The use of the CAD is very much simplified, and there's a number of tutorials out there that can help and guide you. And there's public designs that can kickstart the process. And the automation piece of it can be done in a code-free environment. So literally a sequence of different steps that will really simulate, and then that can actually drive the physical machine once that's done. Again, very strong on the democratization trend here.
I have a very specific question for you, Simon.
Sure.
How does the modularity of an 8-meter SuperTrack increase to a 10-meter SuperTrack? For example, in other words, do you have to buy more components to reconfigure it, or can you use existing components?
Okay, so the dreaded "it depends" answer. Not so much. So SuperTrack is a series of essentially Lego blocks. So everything is off the shelf and it's configured to the application itself. So to grow a SuperTrack from 8 meters to 10 meters, you would take that into account in your original system design. What we normally recommend is you take off a 180-degree corner at the end, and then you would add 4 more straight modules, 2 on either side, to make it grow from an 8-meter to a 10-meter system. And then inside the configurator, you would, let it know that it's added a little bit of length. And then if you add any shuttles or things like that, you add those inside the configurator as well. So not a whole lot to it other than the actual physical act of taking the system apart, adding 2 more meters, and then putting it back together.
Very good, thanks. Can either of you provide, I love these questions. Can either of you provide examples of clients who have retooled their facilities in response to COVID-19?
Sure. Go for it, Simon.
Okay. So there was a couple of press releases that ATS put out for partners that we did work with. So there's been a number of examples inside of our business for retooling and creating new automation for COVID-based applications. So we've been involved in both. Maybe the one that I like better is we have a partner who was manufacturing, I'll just say technology, so I don't go too far into it. And they needed the automation cell in 16 weeks, which that's unprecedented almost in the custom automation world. But the interesting thing is that we're ramping up that line to do that. We're on track to deliver in the time frames needed. But after they're done manufacturing COVID, they're going to retool that line to actually build another product. So it's almost the other way. They've invested in COVID-based automation, and then once they're done with it, they've already have a plan to move that over into building product that they'll sell to the market. And that's SuperTrack based, modular automation based. And that's really the only reason that we were able to pull off both the scale and the timeline that was required.
Yeah. And on our end, we've also published some case studies on some of the machines that we're able to deploy during COVID, but it goes from simple social distancing barriers like we've seen. We've also been involved in a number of ventilator projects on the mechanical side of things there, and a number of other projects where people are retooling and therefore increasing the automated and the manual processes. And we've deployed a number of small, very simple conveying pick and place machines, as well as workstations for people to tackle the new needs of their production.
I have another one that's built off of the previous question. So with COVID-19 being prevalent force in the world, companies again are having to resort to modular automation to accelerate product development. How has this acceleration of manufacturing impacted the delivery of in-person solutions? Has the impact been positive or negative? So I think if I understand correctly, the actual implementation of these technologies does still require a human element. So has that been impacted by COVID-19?
So I think it has, yeah, and I'm maybe hopefully answering this question correctly, and I'm looking at it as, you know, in-person integration of the automation itself. And you say resort to modular automation, and I would say that solutions have been enabled by modular automation. And if you look at that kind of graphic that we had where you have kind of a series of disparate modules, that's actually really helping on the floor. And we see that with our integrators here at ATS, where an operator and integrator is able to work on a particular module, you know, properly social distance from other people, and then you're able to bring those together after they've already been, you know, maybe not fully integrated, but they've been developed and tested. And so then you bring them together and you can have one or two people kind of pull it together at the end. So modularization has really helped with the in-person delivery of automation.
And from a Vention perspective, I can think of two ways that this has been impacted. The first one is the ability to continue and simulate online, and therefore have people still do that working from home. And so that limits the time that one needs to be on the shop floor testing and refining the sequence of automation. The other thing is, because all of our components are modular, it's typically only one tool to assemble all of the Vention equipment. The time it takes from the moment that parts are received to having a functional equipment is shorter. And so what we've seen is people stay much less time on the floor during the implementation phase.
This is, again, building off the previous one, but I think there's a lot of use cases surrounding this one. Is what's the trade-off between implementing a modular automation solution, but also respecting social distancing protocols and not taking up more shop floor space? So it's actually very interesting because, of course, we need to implement social distancing barriers and have a respectable distance between operators. So is there a big trade-off between implementing that modular automation while respecting social distancing?
In my mind, not really. And I'm going to try to answer this by taking an example. I think if there's two people that are required to, say, palletize products at the end of a line, right, and that is replaced with an automated, very simple and discrete palletizer that we're able to produce, then you're at the same time reducing the risk from having people work closely, as well as improving the productivity through the automation. So I think there's a good calculation that needs to get done, and I think it's on a case-by-case basis. But I can think off the top of my head of several examples where, as I said, that's not exactly the case.
Okay, I have another one, I think directly for Simon. What are the advantages of Supertrack's electromagnetic propulsion versus standard types of conveyor movement?
Well, there are a number. I would probably summarize them just in the larger bucket of control. So electromagnetic propulsion gives you significant control over the motion profile. And so you get one individual control of each one of the shuttles, but then you have the ability to accelerate the shuttle at basically whatever you need to, depending on the cycle times and the motion profile that you need. So that can be right down to the fine control of if you were moving a beaker of fluid, you can control the acceleration profile so that you don't impart too much force on that fluid to spill it. And SuperTrack and electromagnetic propulsion gives you that. You get really high speeds, so up to 4 meters per second. And then you also get really high accuracy, up to plus or minus 10 micron. So really, really high precision in the shuttle motion. So very high speeds, very high acceleration, and high control over the acceleration profile. And a lot of accuracy is built into that electromagnetic propulsion. And then maybe the two other benefits is because you're using electromagnetics, there's very few things that move on a SuperTrack, only really the wheels on the pallet or the shuttle themselves. So highly, highly reliable, because when things don't break, often things don't, or sorry, when things don't move, they often don't break. And because you're using the electromagnetics, highly, highly reliable system. And then the one that often gets overlooked is it's very quiet and very clean electromagnetic propulsion. And that offers a lot of advantages. Just if you have a lot of systems in a site, often noise pollution is becoming more challenging today. And then if you're doing anything in food or life sciences, the cleanliness really is a significant advantage for electromagnetics.
Very good, thanks. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So this one is pivoting it a bit. It's going back to the design phase. Patrick mentioned the quick design to commissioning in the opening slides. Does accelerating that machine design process increase the risk? Is there a trade-off between speed and risk?
I don't believe so. And that is because all of the modular parts that we're discussing today have been extensively tested, right? And so the fact that you're combining parts that have been designed to be meant to be combined does not increase the risk, but does increase the speed of that design. And so in my mind, right, the engineering that comes before a modular part can be released is really important. And once that is released, then I don't think that this increases the risk at all.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I think that will have to be our last question. So I want to thank again my speakers for coming here today and sharing all of your insights, and thanking our webinar attendees. As mentioned previously, this is recorded, so we will follow up by sharing the recording within a couple days. If you have any more follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to email us directly, and we will try to answer them as quickly and efficiently as possible. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.